Alone plenuth aguron iter peludren goleni auen Tyrannus Owen Rigid Carnunos. Before me, the vulture of the skies and the powers of air in the east. And behind me, the bass of wisdom and the powers of water in the west. And on my right, the white stag and the powers of fire in the south. And on my left, the great bear and the powers of earth in the north. For around me glow the pentagrams, and within me shine the three rays of light. Welcome back to the Sacred Grove. Since our last video, we had a bit of a cold snap and temperatures sank below zero overnight for a couple of days. Today, as you can see, it's pleasant and sunny, and the temperature here in the Frontenac Arch is about 10 degrees Celsius, which is about average for this time of year based on data covering the past 40 years or so. As you can see though, very few deciduous trees now retain many leaves. The sacred oak you can see behind me is completely bare now. So we continue to move slowly towards winter weather, though we haven't had a snowfall yet. Our news stories this week all relate to water, and as we think of cold and snow, we will contemplate the element of water further, and its connection to emotions, and the role they play in our decisions. This week in the news, we'll update some of the stories we first explored in previous videos. There have been further developments related to the salmon stories we explored in episode 2. And related to low sea ice in the Antarctica, there are new measurements of global ocean warming that show that the trend may be accelerating, and I'll address two stories about this worrisome issue. Of course, these stories are connected as the oceans are where salmon make their home during much of their lifespan, as we saw when we explored their complex life cycle. We'll start off to set the context with our first story, as reported by the University of New South Wales in phys.org. The story reports on a study led by Ji Lee of UNSW Sydney and published in Nature Communications. A key finding of the study is that the rate of ocean warming nearly doubled during the years from 2010 to 2020 compared to the decade from 1990 to 2000. The story notes that the increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere resulting from human activity traps heat unevenly. Trapped heat warms the air, the land surface, the oceans, and melts polar ice, as we explored previously. However, oceans are the hardest hit and absorb more than 90% of the excess anthropogenic heat, that is, heat caused by human activity. This heat is absorbed everywhere in the oceans, from the surface to the deep abyssal layers, and in every major ocean basin from the tropics to polar regions. However, there are significant differences in localized distribution of heating. The ocean most affected over the past 2 decades is the Southern Ocean, which absorbed almost the same excess anthropogenic heat as the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans combined. Understanding where heating is more severe, will help with planning, adaptation, and mitigation efforts, which will need to be undertaken to protect threatened coastline human populations and, of course, marine species including corals, salmon, and many others. Furthermore, it is possible that oceans will be unable to continue to absorb as much heat as they have in the future, shifting the impact to air and land areas, potentially increasing weather-related risks significantly, including devastating flooding and forest fires. The research team called for more action from nations that are large emitters of greenhouse gases to meet net zero carbon targets as soon as possible to limit the damage from further ocean warming. Dr. Sjoerd Grooskamp, a scientist from the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research and one of the study co-authors, says that without any action, these net zero pledges are just meaningless. In a second story on ocean and atmospheric anthropogenic warming, the famous former NASA climate scientist James Hansen has published some controversial claims. Hansen first raised the alarm against fossil fuel pollution in congressional testimony in 1988 and has been a prominent protester against fossil fuel use ever since. Hansen argues that there is more sun energy in the atmosphere, partly due to the reduction in particles that reflect heat back into space, a result of efforts to cut pollution. However, this reduction in reflective pollution particles has also reduced this unintentional but beneficially offsetting cooling effect. The result, Hansen claims, is that the rate of global warming has increased by 50% since 2010. Hansen further claims that the contribution of this reduction in heat reflection has not been fully accounted for in climate warming models, including those used by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He therefore projects that the world is warming in response to carbon pollution much faster than the IPCC estimates. The implication, according to Hansen, is that the international goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times is deader than a doornail, and that the 2 degrees Celsius goal is on its deathbed. Although other studies, such as the ocean warming one we just explored in the first news item, show similar increases in the rate of heating, the mechanism and extent of the heating as described by Dr. Hansen has been met with some skepticism, even by other climate scientists such as Dr. Michael Mann of the University of Pennsylvania. However, Hansen's claims are supported by National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration data. What's at stake is the accuracy of warming predictions and models, since Hansen's work is targeted at understanding climate sensitivity, how much warming is caused per unit of carbon pollution. Hansen's study says that from 1970 to 2010, the world warmed at a rate of 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade, but since 2010, the rate has increased to 0.27 degrees Celsius. That figure is the same as that measured in NOAA data. Climate scientist Zeke Housefather of Berkeley Earth agrees that warming is increasing, but at a slightly slower rate of 0.24 degrees Celsius. Either way, as Michael Mann says of James Hansen, it has always been risky to ignore his warnings. And even if, as Mann thinks, there is only a linear increase in ocean heat content, not an accelerating rate, the truth is bad enough. As we explored in episode 2, salmon are under threat due to ocean warming, salmon farming, and loss of habitat, especially due to dams on coastal rivers, among other factors caused by human activities. In this third story, the severity of the sea lice problem in salmon farming has been dramatically demonstrated by an unprecedented recent outbreak. According to this report by Ragnar Thomas, a sea lice outbreak in Tálknafjörður has resulted in the loss or need to dispose of at least 1 million salmon. Tomas quotes Carl Steiner Oskarsson, head of the aquaculture department at the Icelandic Food and Veterinary Authority, MAST, as saying that no one had seen a sea lice infestation spread like this before. The outbreak is currently affecting the fish pens of Arctic fish and Arnarlax in Tálknafjörður. Oskarsson further described the unprecedented severity of the situation, saying that nobody has seen anything like this before. There is a Norwegian veterinarian who has been working in Iceland because of this, and he has never seen anything like this in his 30-year career. Tomas further notes that a press release published on the MAST website noted that environmental bacteria were infecting the lice-induced wounds, making them significantly worse. The release also stated that salmon farming companies in the southern part of the West Fjords have struggled to control the proliferation of sea lice in the fish pens in Patreksfjörður since last spring. In our fourth and final story this week, we explore the importance of dam removal for salmon sustainability. As we saw in the Garlogi Dam story in the second episode, dam removal is the ideal solution for restoring salmon. As this article explores, while technological solutions that allow dams to remain, including fish ladders and salmon cannons, can help at least a little, they fall far short of natural river environments. Many dam removal campaigns have been underway and ongoing for decades, particularly in the U.S. Pacific Coast states, and especially among indigenous people. As we explored in the second episode, the Yurok tribe of the Klamath River canceled the Salmon Festival for summer 2023 due to low salmon populations. The good news, as reported by Chang in this article, is that this year also saw the beginning of the world's largest dam removal project on the Klamath River, where 4 dams are being removed at a cost of almost $500 million in a project scheduled to be completed by next year. The focus of this article is on a campaign by First Nations groups on the Canadian side of the Columbia River Basin. The U.S.-Canada Columbia River Treaty regulates the cross-border Columbia River to prevent flooding and generate hydropower. A key component of the 62-year-old treaty will expire in September 2024. This expiry creates an important moment that is energizing people to seek changes to restore salmon runs in a renewed river treaty between Canada and the U.S. According to Chang's report, Lower Similkameen Indian Band Chief Keith Crow, who is a member of the Syilx Okanagan Nation's Chiefs Executive Council and the nation's lead in the Columbia River Treaty talks, says that, "I think what we are doing in the fight to bring salmon back is vital to us moving forward, and we're not going to back down either." Ktunaxa Nation Council Chair Catherine Tenise said the loss of salmon to the upper Columbia Basin fundamentally changed communities and their ways of life, since the fish was a staple to traditional diets and held significant cultural value. Research studies that Chang cites in his report provide evidence that strongly supports dam removal as far better at supporting salmon than other expensive technology attempts. According to one study carried out on the East Coast in 2012, the effort at 3 major rivers did not yield self-sustaining populations in any eastern U.S. river, despite hundreds of millions in investment on the construction of hatcheries and fish passages. It may be time to admit failure of fish passage and hatchery-based restoration programs and acknowledge that significant Diadroma species restoration is not possible without dam removals, is how the authors put it in the study. One of the authors of that report, University of Victoria biologist Francis Juanes, says studies have shown the only reliable way to fully restore a natural fish run may be a dam's removal. Wanish said that when a dam on the Elwha River was removed about a decade ago in Washington state, you didn't have to reintroduce salmon. They came back naturally. In a sense, that is the best way to reintroduce salmon, especially to a river system. Another main author of the report, John Waldman, a biologist at Queens College in New York, said, "I think there's one universal theme that has emerged over the last 2 decades, which is that dam removal is without question the best solution to bringing these fish back again. Fish ladders and fish elevators provide what's called the halfway measure," he said. So, the scientists have the evidence. Only dam removal works. And the indigenous leaders have the wisdom of salmon. As Chief Crow says, "I've been taught to think 7 generations down, so I'm looking 7 generations ahead of decisions that I make today. How is it going to influence, or how is it going to impact my great-great-grandkids?" We need more of our decision makers to think this way, rather than simply thinking of their own short-term interests, in order to ensure that salmon survive and thrive, and for the entire health of the globe's Gaia organism system. We need more of our decision makers to think this way, rather than simply thinking of their own short-term interests, in order to ensure that salmon, and so many more species, survive and thrive. After I recorded the news summary, but before I finished editing this video, a study was released on PLOS ONE regarding the biodiversity crisis. The previous best estimate on the mass extinction currently underway as a result of human activities causing global biodiversity decline had specified that approximately 1 million animal, fungal, and plant species are at risk of extinction within the next few decades. That extinction projection was a finding of the latest Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES, Global Assessment on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, published in 2019. The new study notes that estimate was known by the IPBES to be low, since it used a conservative, tentative estimate that 10% of all insects are threatened with extinction, while noting that the prevalence of extinction risk in high-diversity insect groups is a key unknown. This new study, based on IUCN Red List data, has estimated that 24% of all insects are threatened with extinction. Based on that major measurement improvement, the study now estimates the total global extinction threat at 2 million species in the next few decades, double the previous estimate. There are 2.2 million known described species. From this basis, most studies now estimate there to be between 5 and 10 million species of animals, fungi, and plants on Earth. So, losing 2 million species is between 20 to 40% of the total. The organic process of evolutionary change on Earth produces a natural background rate of extinction of about 10% of species every million years, 30% every 10 million years, and 65% every 100 million years. Mass extinctions, the loss of at least 75% of species, typically in less than 2 million years, have happened just 5 times in Earth's history. So, if humanity cannot get its carbon, plastic, and other pollution under control, as well as its other destructive behaviors, in just the next few decades, human activities will cause the extinction of species that normally takes over 10 million years of natural evolution. Scary to think about, and definitely inspires hope and courage that we must get it together to prevent this epic tragedy from unfolding. The mission of this channel is to explore being on Earth. Part of that exploration is to bridge across various fields of study. From a Druid's perspective, the Earth is a single being. Where others see divisions, Druids see connections. All creatures, including humans, are connected, as are all human activities, including creativity in the arts. So let's take a look and a listen to some great work by the awesome musicians and artists that connects to this week's theme. This week in photos, we're looking at two macro landscape shots from one morning a year ago in November 2022. These two shots feature a marvelous type of lichen, whimsically called pixie cups. They are only about a centimeter tall, so you have to lie down on the forest floor to take photos like these two. We are lucky here in Threshold Forest to have lots of them. They seem to like to grow in association with caribou moss, which is not actually moss, but rather another type of fruticose lichen, which both resembles the antlers of caribou and which caribou also like to eat. You can see caribou moss in the second shot. Together with juniper haircap moss, which look like miniature pine trees, they all create tiny fantasy forest landscapes. You can easily imagine the pixies living among them. This week, we have 4 songs to share, which are connected to our theme of the power of water and the connection to intense emotions. Our first song this week is the powerful Down by the Water by PJ Harvey, which was the lead single from her third studio album, To Bring You My Love, released in early 1995. At that point, having become an established artist, Harvey had the freedom to explore a riskier sound and instrumentation, leaving behind her earlier influences in more mainstream rock, punk, blues. The risk paid off with the song charting in Canada, Ireland, the UK, and the US. In fact, it became her highest charting single in the US, peaking at number 2 on Billboard's Modern Rock Tracks chart. Down by the Water has roots in early American music, in the traditional folk song Salty Dog Blues, and, like that song, expresses a deep connection between powerful emotions and the element of water. In this case, Harvey tells the story of a woman who drowns her own daughter. Harvey has rejected literal interpretations of these lyrics, and fans have put a lot of energy into speculations regarding various interpretations. Despite the ongoing debate, there is some agreement regarding the song's exploration of the tension in mother-daughter or adult-child roles, a theme of lost innocence, and a sense of desperation to cope with overwhelming conditions, as reflected in the lyrics, "Oh help me Jesus, come through this storm. I had to lose her, to do her harm." Whether the lyrics are interpreted as the story of a mother having to kill her daughter, or that of a woman having to kill her inner child, the powerful emotional storm of Harvey's song expresses the intense, overwhelming human experience of being on Earth, especially in the context of the climate and nature crisis. The second song this week is That's What the Water Gave Me, written by Florence Welch and Francis White for the second Florence and the Machine studio album, Ceremonials, that was released in 2011. In this song, themes of being overwhelmed are further explored. In this case, Welch was inspired not by earlier songs, but by the writing of Virginia Woolf and the art of Frida Kahlo. The title of the song comes from the 1938 Kahlo painting of the same name, which presents a view of a woman's feet and lower legs in a white enamel bathtub. In the water float many things, including a volcano, a skyscraper, a sailboat, a dress, a skeleton, and more. According to FridaKahlo.org, though Kahlo never considered herself a surrealist, this work is painted in a surrealistic style and presents Kahlo's images of life and death, happiness and sadness, comfort and pain, as well as her past and present. As for being inspired by Virginia Woolf, in 1941, at the age of 59, Woolf died by suicide by drowning herself in the river Ouse at Lewes. Woolf struggled with her mental health throughout her life, in her courageous struggles with the overwhelming impact of her own human experience. She experienced a series of terrible losses between the young ages of 13 to 22, known as the Decade of Deaths. of her mother in 1895, her half-sister in 1897, her father in 1904, and her brother in 1906. Ultimately, as reflected in the lyrics of That's What the Water Gave Me, Wolfe died by suicide at the age of 59, walking with her pockets full of stones into the River Ouse. As Welch said in an interview with Lewis Corner of Digital Spy, "It's a song for the water, because in music and art, what I'm really interested in are the things that are overwhelming. The ocean seems to me to be nature's great overwhelmer." Welch also explored her interest in spirituality in the interview with Corner, saying, "I love seances, witchcraft, heaven and hell, voodoo, gospel, possession, demons, exorcism, and all that stuff. I'm not a religious person. Sex, violence, love, death, all the topics that I'm constantly wrestling with, it's all connected back to religion. So, a lot of intensely emotional aspects of the human experience of being on Earth were contemplated and reflected in the writing and art that inspired it, and ultimately energized this powerful song of water and emotions." Our third song this week, When the Levee Breaks, is one of the great classic early hard rock songs from the pioneering hard rock band Led Zeppelin. As with PJ Harvey's Down by the Water, this Led Zepp song was itself based on a blues classic that was first written and recorded by Kansas Joe McCoy and Memphis Minnie in 1929. The original was inspired by the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. This massive, devastating flood, the most destructive river flood in U.S. history, resulted from heavy rains that overwhelmed the lower Mississippi River watershed, causing the river to break through levees in at least 145 places. The flooding had inundated 27,000 square miles of the Mississippi Delta. In some places, the water was up to 30 feet deep. About 500 people lost their lives, and more than 700,000 were displaced. Over 200,000 African Americans lost their homes in the lower Mississippi River region and had to live for lengthy periods in relief camps. The life-changing experience led many of them to migrate to the industrial cities of the North and the Midwest, choosing to never return to rural agricultural labor. Led Zeppelin captured the power and emotional intensity of this watery disaster in their version of the blues classic. It's always been one of my top Led Zepp songs and one of my all-time favorites. Many critics agree. It's number 69 on Rolling Stone magazine's Top 500 Songs of All Time. One of the earliest and most famous of rock critics, Robert Christgau, considered it the greatest achievement of Zeppelin's fourth album, ahead of Stairway to Heaven. All music critic Stephen Thomas Erlewine considers it the equal of Stairway to Heaven, describing it as an apocalyptic slice of urban blues, as forceful and frightening as Zeppelin ever got, and its seismic rhythms and layered dynamics illustrate why none of their imitators could ever equal them. Keeping in mind the life-changing impact that the disastrous Great Mississippi Flood had, while listening to John Bonham's booming drums and the emotional resonance of Robert Plant's vocals on When the Levee Breaks, makes it all too easy to imagine the global devastation to come if we continue to warm the oceans at the current pace. Our fourth and final song this week is an amazing piece of art by an amazing artist that has been created specifically to raise awareness about the plight of salmon that we've been talking about over the past few episodes. As reported by Allison Hussey on November 5th on Pitchfork.com, Björk, whose advocacy for the environment in her home country has encompassed geothermal energy, public lands, and now wild salmon, is releasing a song called Oral on November 21st that she originally wrote about 20 years ago. She never found a good fit for the song on subsequent albums, but becoming increasingly aware of the terrible situation of salmon farming in Iceland, she realized it was a perfect fit for the issue. Now, Björk has teamed up with Rosalia to produce a poppy song that has a happy tone and focuses on solutions to give people a voice. And proceeds from Oral will be used to support a legal case against the fisheries, brought forth by residents of the town of Seyðisfjörður on the eastern side of Iceland. The song isn't released yet, so I can't provide a link to it yet, but I will share it with an upcoming video. Keep an eye out for that, and speaking of things you can do to help with the nature and climate crisis, be prepared to contribute to Björk's cause to save the salmon of Iceland. This week's t-shirt features art from the Tabula Mundi tarot deck. I won this t-shirt in an audience giveaway while I was a listener of the Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast, hosted by this deck's creator, Mel Moline, and her esoteric colleague T. Susan Chang. And you can see me wearing it in the introduction and news segments. This t-shirt features a variation of the art for the Priestess card, with added text for Fortune's Wheelhouse and an alternate title for the Priestess, Hero of the Astral Plane, which alludes to the skill of astral projection and the correspondence the Priestess card has with intuition, the inner voice, and the higher self. Unfortunately, I checked the Fortune's Wheelhouse Redbubble store, and this t-shirt is not available at the moment. Maybe it will be restocked in the future. Meanwhile, Fortune's Wheelhouse logo t-shirts are available, and I've included links in the description for them. So now, let's take a deeper dive into the deep waters and emotions of this week's tarot card. It's the one we saw in the t-shirt of the week, the Priestess from the Tabula Mundi deck. As I mentioned, this card corresponds to the moon, which is full in the sky behind the head of the Priestess, and also represented in both full and crescent form in her headdress. Corresponding to the moon, the Priestess card is associated with the inner journey of self-knowledge, intuition, the inner voice, and the higher self. The Priestess stands between the pillars of light and darkness, fire and water, and is the embodiment of balance and equilibrium between will and emotion. She knows both her intentions and her deepest feelings, and harnesses and manages both with wisdom, as represented by the scroll she holds in her hand, the scroll of self-knowledge attained within the inner temple. The Priestess is surrounded and cloaked by flowing waters that swirl and form into whirlpools at the stations of the Tree of Life. The Priestess is connected with the goddess Artemis, the huntress and moon maiden, who hunts by enchantment with her silver bow. The card also corresponds with the letter Gimel, seen at the lower left, which means camel, and signifies that, like the camel, the Priestess crosses the desert, in her case, the sterile expanse of the primordial abyss, the original chaos before the creation of the world, the sea behind the veil, and the source of all waters. In this way, the Priestess represents not only contact with the inner higher self, but also connection to the hidden foundations of reality and nature. With both self-knowledge comprising inner wisdom and emotional awareness, as well as the ability to see and connect beyond the veil, the Priestess connects the conscious with the unconscious, and secrets are revealed. In striving to follow the example of the Priestess, knowing ourselves and understanding the nature of reality, we can develop a better relationship in harmony and balance with all of life around us as we explore being on Earth. Finally this week, as I promised earlier, here are some things you can do about climate change. These are from a list of top 10 things to do about climate change from the David Suzuki Foundation. I've put a link in the description for the website with the complete list. For now, I wanted to highlight 3 of the actions on the list, since they are things I've mentioned before. First and foremost is the need to urge government to take action. This is at the top of the Suzuki list, and when you visit the page, you can sign a petition. That's taking action. The second tip from the Suzuki list is to consume less, waste less, and enjoy life more. This is a big one for me, and it's the main reason why I choose to live in the forest. Spending time in nature is a key part of this. I find that living in the forest and connecting with nature every day fills my life with real wealth. Having this privilege reveals that the consumer products and services most people think they need are not just unnecessary, but unhealthy for you and everyone else. I'll just say it simply. Stop consuming fossil fuel economy products and you stop contributing to the destruction of the planet. And this item on the Suzuki list has a link to a nature challenge. More action you can take. Another closely related action from the Suzuki list is to eat for a climate-stable planet. There are 4 main ways to do this. 1. Eat less meat, especially beef. And of course, don't buy farmed salmon. 2. Buy unprocessed, raw, local food whenever possible. 3. Don't waste food. And 4. Grow and forage your own food. The Suzuki webpage has lots more detail that breaks these down into more specific actions you can take. So, in summary, these 3 things. 1. Urge government action. 2. Connect with nature. And 3. Eat better. Those are 3 things that are very good for you and very good for life on the planet too. Check out the Suzuki list at the link in the description. And please like this video and subscribe to my channel to keep up with climate crisis news, get more music and art recommendations, and learn more about action you can take to live sustainably while exploring being on Earth. My alone planet Aguron Iter Peludrin Golani